Hello the internet, welcome to Apprentice Marks. My name is John, and in this video I'm going to show you how I made this computer desk right here. You ready? Let's get started. This project started for me when I took a new job that required me to work from home. I had seen a really cool farmhouse style table at an antique store in town, and I decided maybe I'd like to try and emulate it. Now the first thing on this project that I needed to build was the tabletop. I wanted to get kind of an old look, and I found some old Barnboard. I took the Barnboard, I cut it all to size, and I cleaned up the tongue and groove, and I glued it all together. Once the glue dried, I got it out of the clamps, and I used some epoxy to fill the gaps in the desktop. And I spent a god-awful amount of time with my hand plane and my palm sander. The next step was to use my router to put a 1/4 inch bevel all the way around the edge of the table. Now for this finish, I decided to go with something called Danish oil. I did 3 coats of the Danish oil, and then I did 2 coats of this diamond wood finish on top. That's just to give the tabletop a little bit of hardness so that it'll kind of resist nicks and scratches and scuffs throughout its lifetime. Fruit smoothie. Looks kind of like unicorn puke. Oh, fuck. That's brain freeze. Shit, that's cold. With the tabletop complete, it's time to start on the table legs and frame. Now, as I previously mentioned, the tabletop was made out of this old Barnboard material. I have no idea how old it is, but it's definitely got some life in it. I thought that it'd be kind of neat to make the rest of the table out of similar materials. This stuff's probably somewhere between 40 and 60 years old, so it's had a good long life, it's plenty dry, and hopefully it's not going to move too much on me after I use it. I glued those things together so that I had a big blank that's 3.5 by around 3.5 inches, and the goal will be to cut my final 3 inch by 3 inch leg out of that larger piece. I'm going to start marking these pieces out here, and in order to make sure that I don't fuck it up and have some legs that are longer than others, I'm taking the approach of using the same tool setup for all 4 legs. So if I mark this line 1/2 inch from the top on this leg, then before I change my 1/2 inch measurement, I'm going to do the same marking on all other legs. That way, hopefully, they all come out the same. Now, mortises are just rectangular sockets that you put into the wood that accept like a rectangular tab on the piece that's supposed to attach to the wood. So in my case, the mortises on my legs are 1 inch wide by 2 inches long by 3/4 of an inch deep. And I'll make a corresponding tenon on each of the aprons for the table that will slot into those mortises, and that's how the table will be joined together. I jigged up my legs in the drill press with a 1 inch Forstner bit. It drills those holes with more or less a flat bottom. I could line it up with my markings and drill 2 holes that took out the vast majority of the material in the mortises, and then I can go in and finish them up with chisels. I need to cut the legs of my table to be 26.25 inches long. Now it's very important that I make all 4 legs the same height so that the table doesn't like wobble all over the place once I set it down on a presumably flat floor. Normally the way that I would set something like this up is I would put a jig up on my table saw. I would use the fence of the table saw, and I'd put it 26.25 inches to the right hand side of the blade, and then I put my crosscut sled on here, and I would line the top of my legs up with that fence to make sure that I'm cutting exactly 26.25 inches. In this case, I can't do that because my fence does not go 26.25 inches to the right of my blade. That's too long for this table saw to handle. So what I've done instead is I've put all the legs on the table saw bed, and I pushed the tops, which I know are flat, up against the fence as a guide on this side. Then I've clamped all the legs together, made sure that they're square to that fence. Then I measured 26.25 inches on one and used a square to run that line down all 4 legs. Now I can unclamp these, put them in the crosscut sled, and cut them all on this line, and they should come out to be exactly the same height, plus or minus, a 32nd of an inch, which is not perfect. I'd like it to be better than that, but it's going to be close enough that my table shouldn't weeble wobble all over the place. I'm going to do something real simple here that takes a pretty basic table and makes it classy as fuck. I want to put an angle on the legs to make them appear thinner than they actually are and accentuate their length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure down 6 inches from the top of my leg and that's twice the height of my apron. So my apron is 3 inches tall, and then another 3 inches down is 6 inches. And then at the bottom of the apron, I'm going to measure in 1.5 inches, and that bisects the leg, because the leg is 3 inches wide, so we measure in 1.5 inches to bisect it. And then we're going to take a long straight edge, and we're going to join those two measurements. And crucially here, we're going in the direction of where the mortise and tenon joinery is over here on the bottom. So we're going from what will be the front of the leg, which is the side that doesn't have any joinery on it, toward the back of the leg, the side that does have joinery on it. And so now, down the length of the entire table leg, we've halved the apparent thickness of the leg. I'm going to turn the leg. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So if one of those sides was the front, this other side will be the outside side, the outside face of the table. So on the two corners that are facing outward, the table is going to be angled. And then we're taking our leg again, the joinery is on the back side, the mortise is over here. And so we're going from the apparent front of the leg toward the apparent back of the leg. Now if I cut along this line and this line that I've established, I'm going to create a nice thin 1.5 inch leg down at the bottom here, and it's going to look a whole lot more elegant than when we started. Now because I got to make 8 of these cuts, 2 for each leg, it's worth spending a few minutes making a jig in advance of trying to make the cuts, because the last thing you want to do is get this far in a project and then screw everything up by doing something that's not really well thought out. And now I know that when I run this sled through the saw, just like this, it's going to cut the bevel that I expect. Ta-da! You know what's super weird is the sight of a table saw running and making no noise. That's what happens when you forget to turn your microphone on while you're working in the shop. I mean, I guess I could dub in like a fake table saw sound or make a sound with my mouth like, but it's not quite the same. After cutting the bevels into the table legs, I moved on to cutting the aprons and stretchers. Now, I don't actually really know what the difference is between an apron and a stretcher. I'm not really good at the theoretical side of this furniture making business. I refer to the aprons as the long bits, the front and the back of the table frame in this case, and the stretchers as the short bits, the parts that go between the front and the back of the table frame in this case. I've cut 2 long aprons and 4 short stretchers. With all the mortise finished, it's time to cut tenons. I'm going to be cutting a tenon on each end of all the stringers and all the aprons. The first setup that I'm going to use is for this inner part of all of the tenons. It's 1/4 inch above my jig here and 3/4 inch from the inside of the blade. That means that when I slide up to my stop block here, I'm going to cut a rabbet that's 3/4 inch deep and 1/4 inch tall. And then if I take the first pass and move it and move it and move it and move it, I'm going to form that half of my tenon. Then I can flip this over, form the other half of the tenon. The second table saw setup is pretty much identical to the first, except that the blade is now 1/2 inch above my jig. And that'll allow me to cut the tops and the bottoms of my tenons. And as before, we can check to see that the tenon fits in our mortise. Sanding. Sanding's just the worst, man. I gotta tell you. It is the least enjoyable part of woodworking, as far as I'm concerned. Now, when it comes to assembly, I don't need any screws, any other fasteners. All the hard work is done by the joinery here. So I'm just putting a bunch of glue inside of the mortise, and then I'll put some glue on the tenon as well. I'll knock them together, throw them in clamps, make sure they're square in all the dimensions. Donut. Oh fuck, it's banana cream pie flavored. That's phenomenal. Oh man, I'm gonna get diabetes. It's the next morning again, the table's been clamped overnight, and it's time to put the first coat of primer on. So I decided to finish this thing with a chalk paint. Chalk paint's like a really matte finish, and true to the name, it looks sort of like chalk in the sense that it really doesn't gloss at all. And it's hard to see the impact of this stuff on account of basically painting white on white. This particular color is called Old White, which I guess just means it looks dirty, but whatever, I'm not the colors guy, that's my wife's department. Now, where I totally dislike painting, for some reason my wife seems to actually enjoy it, so she offered to help out, and I mean, I wasn't gonna turn down somebody gonna paint for me. Maybe next time she'll sand for me too, because God knows I hate that job as well. 2 coats of chalk paint later, and this thing's looking great. It's time to put a layer of wax on it now. This stuff's really easy to use. You just take a lint-free rag and you get some on the rag, and then you rub it into the wood until it feels dry to the touch. The wax protects the chalk paint from future damage and scuffs and stuff like that. I screwed up. Before I assembled the tabletop, I should have cut slots in each of the aprons here to accept these little Z clips. The intent of these guys is to sit in the slot and screw to the bottom of the tabletop so that the table can continue to move, expanding and contracting with the seasons without cracking itself all to smithereens. I didn't do that, so we're gonna have to cut the slots now. I've got the tabletop positioned on the frame, and now I'm going to screw it down with the little Z clips. Shush. So that's it, the desk is finished, and it turned out way better than I thought it was going to. This is definitely the largest piece of furniture that I've done to date, and it turned out really, really well. I've been actively working at the desk for a couple of weeks now, and it's everything that I wanted. It's the right height, it's the right size, it looks great. I just want to do the rest of this room in this style. If you want to see more of my work, you can follow me over on YouTube, just search for Apprentice Marks and you'll find me there. And if you want to see what I'm up to between videos, make sure you follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Apprentice Marks on both places. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers.